Women's distinctive strengths and behaviors provide them with many advantages, yet the very habits that help them early in their careers can hold them back as they seek to rise in organizations. How can we help women excel and take more leadership positions? That's our topic for today, so get your pens and notebooks ready. Hi, I'm Andy Storch, your summit host, and I'm excited to introduce you to our next amazing speaker. Anju Choudhary is the Global Head of Learning and Diversity and Inclusion at NextRole Inc., a marketing and data technology company based in San Francisco. Anju is a people strategist and a D&I champion who is passionate about using research to inform how we detect, discuss, and confront bias with the ultimate goal of building more diverse, equitable, and inclusive communities. Welcome, Anju, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Andy. So excited. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction.
You're welcome. My pleasure. And, you and I were already having a really great discussion about this. You come from a strong L&D background, and yet I know you have a really big passion and interest around D&I that started well before it became really cool and popular like it is now, right? So what got you so interested in D&I programs?
Yeah. So thank you so much for that question. I got interested in the D&I programs my pronouns are she and her, and I just got really conscious about making sure to introduce myself that way. That is because of what's happening around us everywhere. And I guess where I came from, a diverse background, growing up and traveling in different countries and being a military kid, I just got conscious of a few things early in life. And then I realized that though I do have this diverse experience, but it's still limited by my background and my ability to see and understand information framed by the context and environment in which I grew up and operated in. And I also quickly realized that developing the ability to check and challenge my own assumptions and judgments is really critical, and also have to look at others' perspective. So that was my personal journey of looking at D&I lens and looking at the way I work and function in my personal life from that lens. And at work, of course, being a woman had its own challenges. Have been in L&D industry for about 18 years now, from telecom to retail, and then a large portion of that being in tech in a very large firm like IBM, and then another small to medium-sized business of about 27,000 employees at USD Global, and now in a marketing tech firm. And each one posed different kind of challenges. While navigating that, I realized that as an L&D professional, I do have this possibility to create an impact, a long-term impact through the programs that we lead, which will cause for women to actually assume power positions of power as they go through these programs. So that got me interested. And of course, we all are not we're all aware of what's happening, the social unrest happening in the world. And we know that the more diverse companies actually have better results, better stakeholder returns, better benefits for everybody when you think about possible innovation that happens with diverse population.
Yeah, absolutely. You are definitely passionate about this subject, and it's something that has been around for a while, was already gaining in importance, and of course, with the rise of the social justice movement, has become even more important. But before that, COVID hit back in March and changed the way everybody is working. How do you think DEI has changed as a result of COVID and this new virtual world?
Right. And, that's such a great question. Unfortunately, being a crisis mode can cause even the most intentional and well-meaning leaders to fall into a pattern of bias and exclusion. And the research shows that when we are stressed, we often default into our gut instincts, and rather than making deliberate and goal-oriented decisions. And yet leaders must prioritize inclusion at this point. Organizations are more likely to be innovative in the face of this crisis if we seek inputs from diverse groups and employees and approach this problem from a variety of perspectives. At the same time, employees from historically underrepresented groups may feel less safe, and they don't want to speak up because of possible consequences. So now is the time for leaders to think about what will they need to do for their employees, especially who are in most vulnerable and marginalized communities. And then I want to quote T'Challa, being such a big fan of Black Panther. He mentioned that in the times of crisis, you must build bridges and not barriers. So this is an opportunity for us to build into that equity gap that we see at workplace.
Love that quote. In times of crisis, we must build bridges, not barriers. And there are a lot of people out there working hard to build bridges, and we're doing our part here as well. And what I want to specifically dive into is this topic of women in leadership and how we can support more women moving into leadership positions. I know you probably know way more about the statistics than I do, but I know just from looking at the demographics that typically more women than men graduate from college and often enter the workforce at the lower levels. But when you get to the top, it's a much higher percentage of men. So what happens? I know you've looked at some of the research behind this. Like, why does this happen?
Yeah, well, what gets measured gets done. And then sunlight is the best disinfectant strategy. So I'm going to quote something from the research that I recently read. In 1948, 32.7% of US labor force were made of women. By 2016, this number increased to 46.8%. And I think it must be hovering around 50% at this time. This means as of 2016, almost half of the jobs in US were filled by women. And statistically, this should also mean that about half of leadership positions should be by women as well. But 2017 demographic study shows that that's not the case. And then we also participate in Women at Workplace study. And I'm going to quote some of the statistics from there. 13 million participants who got employed, they participated in this study. 68,000 people were surveyed in workplace experiences at participating companies from the study. 329 companies shared their pipeline data. And then since 2015, the initial study overall says 22 million people were employed. So the key takeaway from the overall 2019 Women at Workplace study is women, particularly women of color, remain underrepresented in the workplace. And from overall study across all participating American companies, it was found women are 48% at entry level, as we just discussed, but only 21% of C-suite executives, and women of color are 18% of entry level and 4% at C-suite executives. Now, this should actually make us think that the society that we live in is not these numbers. So that representation, what happens to that? And most of the time, people put it on leaky pipeline. And that's like an easy thing to point towards and say, it's not me, it's them, or it's the process. And I'm going to think about this analogy. When we're fishing and we can't fish, do we blame the fish for not being able to do that? Or we change our fishing strategy? So I think this is an opportunity for us to change that fishing strategy on how we are hiring, promoting, and retaining women at workplace. Also, there's another study which within the Women at Workplace study, another really interesting stats was bright spot at the top, which means close to 45% of companies now have 3 or more women in C-suite, which again, it's a progress, but we're seeing this progress is not real life. It doesn't reflect our society and community. So at these numbers, there's in the grand scheme of things, still need to continue. The inequities are present in the representation. And at Next Role, we've made the progress of women in people management positions. From 2016 to 2019, we increased our representation of women in people management position from 32 to 40%, which I'm really proud of. Clearly, people management position is one aspect that we all know we would like women to assume the position of power, so they can bring more women into those power, so they can highlight the challenges that women face at workplace. Yeah. There's one more that I'd like to quote, which talks about how in leadership position, once women are actually hired, it becomes more like tokenism. And that's pretty interesting. So because they need some sort of a picture to show on their website, there might be one person as a part of a board, there might be one woman who's part of the C-suite, but when that happens, it's actually really sad, Andy. And the reason for that is this one person would not be able to have voice in decision making. This one person would not be able to lead meetings. They will not be able to ask challenging questions because they do not feel part of the team. And then we've heard about the boys club, which is quite uh, predominantly visible in most of the tech industry. So those are some of the outglaring challenges that Women at Workplace study highlights. And I think even if people don't participate in the study, they don't have to. Even if you've not done any statistics, like you said, it's quite visible. The entry level position versus who shows up as leaders in the companies, it's quite visible for us to see.
Yeah, it's very visible, and it's great to hear that there are companies making changes. Those numbers are increasing, still far from where we'd want them to be, still far from equitable, and far from um, comparable to the general population. When you look at leadership, I'm curious. When you talk about those numbers dwindling from 50% of the workforce up to, I think you said 22% of the C-suite or executive level, what are the main reasons behind that? And then what can we do to change it so that more women are moving into leadership positions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So coming to what actionable stuff L&D can do, or why does this happen? Why do they leave? So very similar to the leaky pipeline, there's a Lehman study that talks about 43% of highly qualified women leave at the time of when they want to have a family. So especially at the time when they're childbearing age, as they call it, or when they're having children. I myself have left IBM at the time when I was having my second child and we were moving countries. There were great policies at IBM that would support that kind of a change of having a child. So we would have a 3-month maternity leave at the time, but that didn't seem enough because that came with additional challenges of moving in different countries, etc. So just thinking about that, if there are women who need to take a break for having children, to start a family, or to take care of somebody in the family, what kind of policies do we have? Why do they have to leave the organization if there is a way to support? And then additionally, while we are at the workplace, how are women being able to contribute towards day-to-day experiences? What kind of day-to-day experiences do they have at workplace? And I'm going to quote, let's say meetings, for example. So you would have heard about women taking the roles of note taking or other items like that. Could you organize for a breakfast meeting and stuff like that? So why does that go to women all the time? And when a woman presents an idea, there's a term called bropriation, when somebody takes over that idea and a man says it and that gets acknowledged. I mean, there is a term. So how prevalent is that? Also, women historically, through research that we know, do not feel comfortable speaking up for themselves, and they do not apply for position unless they're 100% ready. So when there is a new role that comes up in an organization, they wouldn't apply for it unless they're 100% ready. Men, however, are more okay to apply if they're 50% ready for that role. So when we already know about these statistics, we know that they would not apply. We need a system that allows them, that supports them, that challenges them and say, hey, I would like to. So if I was a manager and I see a woman in my team who's not applying for a certain position, which I think they should try for, I should challenge them and say, you know what, I'm going to support you. I want you to apply for this role. So having that kind of support system. Coming back to the systems, so our talent management systems are historically very biased. If you look at it, the way we've used these systems are pretty biased. Talking about performance management, we've seen the language used in performance giving review feedback to women is not actionable. It's not based on performance, but rather than on personality. And I got this really cool stat somewhere. Yes. So words described for men are analytical, competent, apathetic, confident. And for women, it's compassionate, enthusiastic, energetic, organized. So and a question to you, Andy, if you have two candidates, one is analytical nature and the other one is compassionate nature, who would you hire?
Well, a lot of typical men might go for the analytical, but you're talking to Andy Storch here. I value compassion and empathy. So I'm going to go with the compassionate one, but I get where you're going with
Thank you.
that.
Yeah, so most of the time the hiring decision is made for analytical because our job requires, nowhere in a job role description you will see we want a leader who's compassionate but more analytical, right? And the same way the negative feedback given to men is about arrogance, while for women it's inapt. So when a firing decision is made, then somebody who's inapt will tend to get fired rather than somebody who's arrogant, because that seems like a coachable trait. So in performance management, when managers use these kind of words to describe performance of men versus women, then that's a litmus test because it's actually not giving anything actionable to women. And then I'm going to come back to this protective hesitation in giving feedback. So most of the time, if there's a guy who's a manager for a woman, they would not give direct actionable feedback in the fear of not sure how will she react, not sure what's going to happen. And it's, interestingly, it's not just for women, but anybody in underrepresented groups, this happens. They do not get clear actionable feedback, and hence they do not see that kind of growth to lead them to leadership positions. COVID-19 actually sort of became a tipping point with us being virtual and then not having that personal connect, and women are not receiving as much feedback as they would have received at workplace. So I think everybody needs to be more intentional about creating space for more conversation and feedback. I said a lot of things, so I'm going to take a pause and say,
Said a lot of great things in there. You're on fire right now. So many things that I wanted to follow up on and ask you about. But you gave a lot of the great reasons why this is happening. And I was going to ask you about, it's known that men were more often going to apply for things if they're not ready, and women will wait until they're perfectly ready. Case in point right here, I'm wholly unqualified to be hosting this virtual summit, but I decided to do it anyway. But we see things like that happening all the time. And you talked about how organizations need to, support and challenge women to go after more of those leadership positions. I'm curious, you said that at Next Role, you were able to raise the level of, or the number of percentage of women in management positions from, I think you said 32% to 45% in just 3 years. And I'm curious, how did you do that?
Absolutely. So that's coming to what is it that we're doing differently that's allowing us that kind of a growth. And I'm really proud to say that our company, at the size that we are, is still leading so many efforts that I didn't even see in some of the larger companies. First and foremost, we want to create a space of belonging for our women. And ERG groups, or some call them as BRG, which is Business Resource Group or Employee Resource Group, are a great support system. They create a space where women feel welcome, they can share their challenges, they find their home in a way. So our Role Women group is actually one such employee resource group in our company that actually allow us to think about what challenges, the group actually helps us point out and highlight challenges. They have direct reference, they have direct contact with our leadership team. So, and the executive sponsor actually helps us highlight these challenges. At the same time, be able to celebrate their wins too. So employee resource group is one of the such things. Then having internal tools and resources like career development programs, mentorship programs, and sponsorship programs. We just launched our third cohort of mentorship program for 2020. We have so many women participating, but at the same time, so many executive leaders who showed up and participated as mentors. Now, coming back to the point that you mentioned, women do not apply unless they're 100% ready. And even sometime when they're 100% ready, they do not apply for an open role because they don't feel comfortable. They do not feel confident enough to apply. And that hesitation actually can overcome when there's a mentor, a right mentor, who would challenge them and say, I think you need to apply. And if a mentor waited for the person to come up and say, hey, can I apply for this role? That means the mentor actually failed. They waited too long and they didn't really give that due. So having those career mapping, career development programs specifically personalized for women, and then having mentors from exec positions, because these will be sponsors who will rave about the the mentee behind closed doors. They would open doors that the mentee didn't know would exist. And that's why we need sponsors, active sponsors and allies who would champion for these women to get leadership positions.
Love that. So the importance of having mentors and sponsors really to challenge and support women. So for people in learning and development, in these organizational roles, what else can we do? What other advice do you have for supporting our women, especially to continue to grow their careers, especially in this virtual world?
Absolutely. We've been talking about personalized learning for a long time. We've been talking about one size doesn't fit all. We've realized that's the truth. And that's why there's so many programs which are customized to the needs. For example, mentorship programs, quite an umbrella program that can run throughout the company. But we do have a specific program for women in tech because we understand and realize their needs are specific and they need that kind of hand-holding or a customized program in that sense. Same way, for women, there needs to be customized programs, and L&D needs to really evaluate, and it has to be more data-driven and really focus into what are specific challenges for each group. For example, a woman and a mother of 2 children, at this time, my needs might be different than my colleague who's actually helping support her parents into a move, right? But which is a short term. So she needs probably a short term support, while I working and homeschooling kids might need a long term or maybe like a 6 to 1 year term while we are working from home. While a mother who's got a young baby would need a different kind of a support system. So L&D actually can create that space by teaching their leaders to identify how they can support women in their teams. So it's not really obvious. It's not their, so if, Angie, for example, you haven't had that learned experience like me of being a woman, right? So if that's the case, then how would we expect you to know? But L&D can actually take charge and create these opportunities to really help their leaders take a step back and say, am I giving this feedback? And is this coming from biases? Am I taking this action, which is well-intended, well-meaning? For example, and you've probably heard this example in many places, if there's a job or a project that requires a lot of traveling, and if there's a new mom in the system, the manager is actually wishing them well. And they're like, I'm taking care and I'm being supportive by helping them not give this assignment. But I'd say, when in doubt, do not assume on their behalf. Ask. It's as simple as that. So if somebody was not giving me that opportunity at the time when I had a young baby, I think they don't think I'm capable of doing that job. Right? It's more, women tend to internalize and ask themselves question, what didn't I do right that they didn't think I could take on this assignment? I had a great support system with my in-laws and my parents to take care of the young child. And I could actually travel the world at that time, only if my manager just asked me that opportunity, right? So don't assume. The other one will be stretch opportunities. So L&D can actually work with different teams, find out these stretch opportunities and train folks to actually find different career paths that they can adjust in different phases of their time. For example, somebody in sales and they want to move into HR. How would they know they'd be successful in HR? So if somebody worked with me and said, hey, Anju, are you looking for some stretch opportunities? And we actually do have a program which is peer-to-peer learning, and we have facilitators. So somebody in sales worked with us as a facilitator. They think this is a great, exciting opportunity and want to continue into L&D space. And then we train them to take these opportunities further. So work with leaders to identify these spaces where new career paths can be developed. And then returnship programs. Those are great opportunities. So if somebody's taken a break for taking care or for their family or for taking care of somebody in the family, this is a great time to train them to come back. Now, if I miss work for like a week for vacation, I come back and I'm like, oh my God, what has happened? I have no idea. My mailbox got like thousands of email. People are talking things that I don't realize. Imagine that happening to a woman who's taken 3 months of maternity leave, and then they come back, they probably feel lost. And that's when they're like, maybe this is not for me. I can't manage. I can't figure this stuff out. That's because of lack of a support system. And when that happens, that's when the leaky pipeline happens. And before even they reach the leadership position, they would have left us. So creating these returnship opportunities is a great space where L&D leaders can help. And then the things that we spoke about. Why are women being called out for housekeeping items? Why are women being not asked for these really star projects? So training management, the middle management, to really understand their biases, to really explain to them on how to create more inclusive practices is important. And middle management, unfortunately, is that layer that got left out. Entry level people understand from their own challenges, and leadership is bought out because they want to create that substantial change. But middle management sort of overworked and they're not bought in. It's not something they started as a strategy. So we need to bring them along through learning and development efforts.
So much great advice there. Fantastic. And as we wrap things up, the last thing I'll ask you about is with all of the things you just talked about, is there any added facet of that we need to account for in this virtual world where everybody's working remotely and, we don't necessarily we're not sitting in meetings with people. We're not seeing each other, to have those impromptu meetings or check in on people in the hallways, that sort of thing. We've got to be a lot more intentional. So anything you would add in terms of how we manage this and continue to support our women in the remote environment?
Absolutely. So I'll just take my personal example. For example, right now with 2 children in other rooms trying to do their homeschooling, once I close my meeting, I just go rush to them, do a check-in, and by the time I'm back, I'm on another meeting. So I haven't had a chance to do informal check-ins, or when I'm grabbing a coffee in the kitchen, then I get to meet somebody. That's not happening at this time. So we need to intentionally carve out the time which will help us actually identify their barriers, talk to them one-on-one, and talk when you connect, that has to be away from work. Talk more, get more empathetic towards your team members, learn about their personal challenges. We are in each other's homes right now. So acknowledge the fact that there might be kids moving around, there might be things happening, but that doesn't mean that I'm not taking my job seriously. Right? That shouldn't be, if I need to log off from a meeting to attend to something personal, that shouldn't be considered that I'm not serious about my job. I love my job. I'm really passionate towards that. And I believe all women are. So give them a benefit of doubt, give them extra space to take care of the family, etc. And then carve out time, intentional time to connect with them and identify what their career aspirations are and how you can support them as their managers.
100%. I mean, that is the world we're living in, and we have to be a lot more intentional. And Anju, this has been great. We've covered so much ground in this conversation. I'm looking back at my notes, and I want to point out, by the way, that you're doing the speaking. I, the man, am taking the notes over here. But I'm looking back at my notes, and we talked about why you're so passionate about DEI, how DEI has changed as a result of the crises we've gone through, the importance of measurement. You talked about the demographics and how in 2016, half of all jobs were filled by women in the US, but only about 22% of leadership positions. The problem with the leaky pipeline theory. We talked about how close to 45% of companies now have 3 or more women in the C-suites. We've been making progress, still more work to do. How Next Role has increased the women in leadership from 32% to 45% at the manager level. We talked about women as tokens and how we need to avoid that, the reasons that women don't rise into leadership positions as often as men, changing roles and how women are treated in meetings, why women don't often apply for leadership positions as much as men do, and how we can support them more as organizations, especially by providing mentors and sponsors, the important changes we need to make to the system to make sure it supports and challenges women to apply for jobs. The programs that your team launched at Next Role, the importance of having mentors and sponsors, as we said, the importance of personalized learning and personalized leadership development, how learning and development can control for biases and microaggressions and help support the organization in change, the benefits of the ReturnShip program you mentioned, which I really like. We need to help managers understand their biases and microaggressions and be more inclusive. I thought that was really powerful. And finally, the importance of being intentional and carving out time to meet with people and support them in this remote world. Anju, we've covered so much great ground, and there's one more thing I know you wanted to add in, which is about equity sequencing questions that I think can be really helpful for us. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So equity sequence questions would help you think through your talent management processes. So think about these questions. Who was this designed with equity in mind? Who was this process designed by, for, with, and without? Who does this benefit and who is disadvantaged because of this process? How can this be effectively transformed to reduce bias, discrimination, and inequity? And what opportunities does this offer to create greater equity and equality? Now, this is with Tidal Equity, and we learn these questions and we try and look at all our talent management processes through this lens. When you look at it and when you answer the question, who was this designed by? Mostly your leaders who are white men folks. Who is this designed without is underrepresented groups and minorities. Who does this advantage? Well, we know who does this advantage, mostly the leadership positions or people who are in contact or who are being mentored or who are being highlighted with the leaders, which is like. So this is definitely not underrepresented minorities, and this disadvantage them. So think through these questions when you're creating a new process or when you're reviewing your current processes, and this might help you create better equity in your company.
That is really useful, and I can see how all of us could really benefit from thinking about that, especially as we are designing, creating development programs. So thanks so much for adding that. So much great value, Anju. Is there anything else you want to add? And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, where's the best place for them to go?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So, like I said, treat each person as they are. My lived experience as a woman and a mother are very different than another woman in my company, in a different business unit, in a different team. So do not think what applies to one person would work for others. So personalize their experiences, personalize their LNG. That would be my takeaway. So think of each person and talk to them. And as a leader, it's your responsibility to take away the barriers and support and eliminate the VUCA word confusions as much as possible, whatever you can do at this time. And if they want to reach me, I'm on LinkedIn as Anju Choudhary. So feel free to reach out. I'll be happy to connect.
Love it. Anju, thank you so much for spending time with us, sharing so much wisdom, statistics, information, value, and inspiration. It's been great for me. And for all of you who have been tuning in, watching, listening, thank you so much for being here. I hope you took lots of notes. As always, try to write down what are those one or two key takeaways, those things that you learned from Anju today that you want to maybe take with you to do differently back on the job. How can you improve the way things are done? How can you improve the way women are moving up in the ranks in your organization and help more women move into leadership positions, move past all these biases that we talked about? We all have the power, and especially in talent development, we are in a critical role, and you have the power and the responsibility to be able to help all women and people from underrepresented groups and everybody really to enable our workforce to be engaged, continue working, developing in their careers, and be more successful as a result. And I want you to be successful and be the hero in this journey. Thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't already, make sure you upgrade to the All Access Pass so that you can get lifetime access to all of our sessions, as well as join our live interactive sessions as well. Again, my name is Andy Storch. Thank you for being here. I'll see you on the next session.